Welcome back to the deep dive. We sift through the noise to bring you the really interesting stuff. And today we've got a document. Well, it's definitely something. It's called Cognitive Warfare and Cultural Fragmentation, an Asymmetrical Threat.
It's quite a title.
It is. And honestly, it lays out a pretty provocative theory. It's arguing there's been this strategic effort since post-2008 to destabilize Western nations. And the core idea revolves around something it labels exogenous ethno-confessional cognitive warfare.
Yeah, what really jumps out from the start is how it claims these networks, military, philanthropic think tanks too,
Yeah.
that they supposedly started these programs.
Programs to do what exactly?
Well, the idea presented is that they aim to kind of import conflict dynamics, like take patterns from the global south.
And bring them directly into Western countries.
Right. And the how, according to this document, is mainly through psychological conditioning of specific groups within those populations.
Okay, so our job today is to really dig into this, understand what the document is claiming about these operations, look at the examples it gives, and figure out what it says the ultimate point is. It's a very specific, maybe disturbing narrative for some. We're here to help you untack its claims. Let's get into it. So, that title itself, Exogenous Ethno-Confessional Cognitive Warfare. It sounds complicated. What is this concept exactly, as the document describes it?
Well, exogenous obviously means external, from outside.
Right.
Ethno-confessional points to ethnicity and religion. And cognitive warfare is about, messing with how people think, their perceptions. So putting it together, the document is basically describing a strategy it claims started after 2008, where external actors allegedly use psychological methods, often playing on religious or ethnic identities.
To deliberately create conflict within Western societies, fragment them from the inside out.
Precisely. That's the core concept it puts forward.
Okay, that's a heavy claim. Who does the document say is behind this? Who are these alleged actors?
It talks broadly about influence networks. It specifically mentions military networks and philanthropic ones.
Philanthropic, like charities or foundations?
Yeah, along with transnational think tanks. Later on, it gets more specific, mentioning a supposed NATO recap extended strategy, and even names individuals like Wesley Clark and Mark Milley, suggesting they facilitated putting these models into place. High-profile names.
Right. So it moves from general networks to specific alleged strategies and even people. And this is where it gets really concrete, or tries to. It talks about behavioral formatting and gives alleged examples, not just theory now. Let's start with the first one it mentions. Iran, between 2005 and 2013, focusing on women. What's the claim there?
Okay, so here the source says it's drawing on internal reports from the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and also the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guard.
Okay.
And it alleges that these so-called religious rehabilitation centers were used. The claim is pretty stark. They were supposedly used to turn dissident women into, well, the document calls them instruments of communal allegiance.
Instruments how?
Through emotional, and it even mentions sexual coercion. The alleged goal was to basically reshape their psychology. And the document claims the purpose was to create individuals who could then spread ideology abroad, often using refugee status as a cover.
So conditioning them and then potentially sending them out?
Yeah, it calls them women agents, supposedly trained in sacrificial obedience for roles in NGOs or diaspora groups in the West. That's the narrative presented.
Wow. Okay, that's specific and troubling. Then it shifts focus to Rwanda, post-genocide, talking about child soldiers. What does it claim happened there?
Here it points to supposedly declassified files from MUAR, the UN mission in Rwanda, and also the EU training mission, EUTM files from 2022.
Relatively recent declassifications, then, it claims.
Right, and these files allegedly show that certain orphanages in Kigali, which were apparently under indirect supervision from some U.S. and French foundations, became places where children were conditioned. It describes these cycles of predation, submission, and identity rupture. Really quite disturbing language.
And what happened to these children afterwards, according to this document?
It states many were then moved out. Exfiltrated is the word used, to Europe, often through humanitarian programs.
But without proper oversight.
Yeah, the document emphasizes a lack of clear legal oversight. And it goes further, claiming behavioral assessments done much later, in 2017, in Belgium and Sweden, allegedly found this latent paramilitary loyalty in some of these individuals, which could supposedly be triggered by certain signals.
So a kind of long-term psychological embedding. That's the implication.
That's the strong implication, yes. A delayed effect.
Okay, so Iran, Rwanda, then it moves to Egypt. Around 2012, 2013, focusing on the Muslim Brotherhood, This sounds like a different kind of operation.
It is framed differently. Here, the source cites alleged leaks from Israeli intelligence, specifically Unit 8200.
Their signals intelligence unit, right?
Correct. And these leaks supposedly suggested that the Morsi government, while in power, was used as a platform.
A platform for what?
For training religious activists and what the document calls cognitive destabilization cells. It even claims they were inspired by old Soviet models.
Soviet models. Okay. And what happened to these trained groups?
The document asserts that groups trained in Cairo then showed up in places like Germany and the Netherlands around 2015.
How?
Often disguised as refugees, it alleges. And it claims some imams connected to these groups were later linked to radicalizing young people in Europe.
So it's drawing a line from training in Egypt to radicalization in Europe via migration routes.
That's the connection the document is making, yes,
Yeah.
based on its interpretation of those alleged intelligence leaks.
Okay, so these examples paint a picture of how these alleged agents or nuclei were supposedly created. How does the document then explain their integration into Europe? It talks about migratory logistics.
Right. It shifts focus to the movement itself. It references documents from ESO, the European Asylum Support Office, from 2015 to 2020, and claims these documents point to pre-planned migration corridors, roads through Turkey, Libya, the Horn of Africa.
Pre-planned by whom, does it say?
It doesn't specify who planned them, but it implies they were managed or influenced. And crucially, it claims these routes involved a kind of confessional filtering.
Filtering based on religion.
Yes, allegedly happening indirectly at border camps, say in Greece or Italy, suggesting a selection process was somehow embedded in the flow.
And once they arrived in Europe, what then, according to this source?
The claim is they were directed towards specific relay associations,
What are those?
often linked, the document says, to progressive or Islamic foundations. And the purpose of these associations was allegedly ongoing psychological supervision. The end goal, as the document puts it, was to establish these mobile cognitive nuclei.
Seeds of conflict, essentially.
That's the idea. Small groups or individuals capable of introducing or amplifying conflict patterns from their regions of origin, but now inside Europe, replicating those tensions.
This whole theory clearly has military undertones, even if it's cognitive warfare. Does the document talk about direct military involvement?
It does. It circles back to those earlier mentions. It claims several NATO officers, including some close to Wesley Clark and Mark Milley, are mentioned in partial reports. Allegedly, they facilitated the implementation of these cognitive models, particularly in Eastern European border zones.
So, suggesting a hands-on role in setting up these alleged systems.
That's the allegation presented in the document, yes. A direct link to military figures or structures.
And what about those think tanks mentioned earlier? How do they fit into the military angle?
The document suggests satellite think tanks. It names TEPA and Circle Voltaire.
Known entities in Europe, yeah.
Yes. It claims they were used as platforms for doctrinal dissemination, basically spreading the ideas and justifications for these alleged operations. It also makes a pretty specific claim about behavioral algorithms, supposedly adapted for displaced children, being leaked, implying a high-tech aspect.
Algorithms for behavioral control, that sounds quite dystopian.
It does. Again, this is the claim within the document.
Given the alleged complexity and secrecy, what does the document say about counterintelligence? Were agencies aware, or were they missing this?
It highlights what it terms a chronic defect of counter-verification, a failure to check properly,
Especially where?
specifically concerning what it calls religious geopolitical axes. It even points fingers at institutions like the Vatican and French bishoprics, suggesting there were areas where this lack of scrutiny was particularly pronounced, a blind spot regarding the religious dimension, perhaps.
So let's try to bring this all together. We have alleged conditioning, managed migration, claimed military and think tank involvement, a lack of counter-verification. What does the document say is the ultimate goal of all this, the big picture?
Well, connecting all those pieces, the document concludes it's all part of one big strategy, a geocognitive strategy of slow fragmentation.
Slow fragmentation. So not a quick attack, but a long game.
Exactly. It's portrayed not as conventional warfare, but as a strategy to erode society from within over time, using existing fault lines or creating new ones. The specific stated aims are pretty ambitious, according to the source. First, to dilute what it sees as traditional religious stability, specifically Catholic confessional stability, creating a kind of hybrid doctrinal chaos.
Okay. What else?
Second, to create generations of people who are conflict-carrying cognitive individuals, people who carry the potential for conflict within them with a delayed effect.
Like those child soldiers mentioned earlier.
That seems to be the kind of example it implies, yes. And third, a really key point, to discredit any attempts by European nations to reassert or consolidate their identity
How?
by automatically associating any such attempts with the far right, or by linking them negatively to Europe's colonial past, essentially making defensive identity toxic.
So putting it all together, the document is essentially describing a plan for what?
Yeah.
A controlled demolition of culture.
Planned cultural implosion is a phrase that seems to capture the essence of the document's conclusion. Yes, that's the ultimate objective it posits.
This document, Cognitive Warfare and Cultural Fragmentation, it really does lay out an incredibly detailed and frankly quite unnerving narrative. It connects dots between alleged military actions, philanthropy, migration, psychology.
It definitely does. And I think its central argument, the reason it calls this an asymmetrical threat, is its claim about these preformatted behavioral matrices.
Meaning the conditioned individual.
Yes. It argues their existence poses a unique danger to what it terms post-Christian sovereign nations. And because of this, the document calls for a fundamental rethink, a reevaluation of how we look at migration, humanitarian aid, even religion, seeing them not just as separate issues, but potentially interconnected tactical elements.
It certainly forces you, the listener, to think about the complex layers of influence that could be at play, according to this source. It's a powerful reminder that narratives about global forces can be framed in many ways, some quite disturbing.
Absolutely. It raises questions about vulnerability and influence in the modern world.
And it leaves us considering just how intricate and potentially hidden these dynamics might be, something to definitely ponder.